From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Tuesday, November 18, 2025. Australia has no choice but to work with China, and that means we need to build our defences against potential Chinese disinformation, interference and cyber attacks. That's the read from Foreign Minister Penny Wong. Wong says China is seeking to reshape our region according to its own interests, but is not sabotaging or destabilising like Russia, Iran or North Korea. Is Susan Lee about to lose the Liberal leadership? And if she does, would Andrew Hastie be the man to replace her? He's a Conservative now being supported by more and more moderates. So should they be careful what they wish for? And what should voters know about this ex-commando who's famous for going his own way? That's today's episode. In October, Andrew Hastie, one of the most intriguing and bright talents of the Liberal Party, quit the front bench. And if you observe politics, you'll know that's often the precursor to a tilt at the leadership, retreating to the backbench for a little while to gather your forces. Jeff Chambers is The Australian's political editor. Jeff, Andrew Hastie is a military man and I'm very interested in his tactics, but I wonder if that's too simplistic a read of what happened to him in October 2025. Why did he quit the front bench?
Well, I think immediately after such a devastating defeat suffered at the May 3 election, there's a lot of soul searching that was going on. Susan Lee, it's pretty obvious now, before polling day had sort of already started making her moves. And as the deputy leader was always going to be in a bit of an ascendant position. So it was no great surprise that you had a divided Conservative faction. So you were left with a really young rump of Conservatives who were trying to find their way. And Andrew Hastie certainly didn't rule out that he had very strong leadership ambitions. Now, I reported at the time, and I think this was a mistake that Susan Lee has made that's being proven now to be a fatal mistake. Andrew Hastie was harbouring ambition to have a serious economic or social portfolio. He's seen that Peter Dutton had been typecast as a hard man, someone that just talks about security, and he was desperate to get out of that.
I believe that net zero is going to be a tragedy for our country. I believe that net overseas migration is far too high and it's locking young Australians out of the housing market. I believe that families are doing it far too tough at the moment. So something's got to change. And I'm simply, during this policy development phase, building principled positions where I think we should go.
So what did they do? They decided to give him the Home Affairs portfolio. And not only did they do that, they put Paul Scar, a moderate backer of Susan Lee, in as immigration. And the tipping point for Andrew Hastie was when he realised that when it came to the formation of immigration policy, which is key, that he would not have the say despite being notionally the senior shadow minister as Home Affairs shadow spokesperson. So that was a real driving point for him. He's obviously got people in his ear, both MPs and serious Conservative campaigners outside the building who believe that him and Jacinta Price are the future of the party. I don't think it's any surprise to Susan Lee and her team that Andrew Hastie is now emerging as a very likely successor to her.
Susan Lee appears to be digging in at the moment. Is Andrew Hastie the kind of person who would mount a challenge, or is he going to sit back and wait for something to happen?
Look, Andrew Hastie understands that he still has a bit of work to do on the policy front and explaining to Australians where he sits on really key areas. Now, he was a big driver to dump net zero. They got to that point last week. Him and Angus Taylor marched into the party room side by side with Jacinta Price on the other side. Now, both Andrew Hastie and Angus Taylor's positions are that that's a big result for the Conservatives. It sort of shows that they're flexing their muscle again and that they have the numbers. And they want to give Susan Lee genuinely some time to sell this policy. And Susan Lee is not going to die wondering. She's out there doing dozens of interviews, press conferences, Now you've got Susan Lee out there very heavily promoting what was really a conservative-led push to dump net zero. That means she's abandoned the people that gave her the job, the moderates and the centre-right faction. So I think ultimately both Andrew and Angus, who are the notional Conservative candidates, who have the numbers behind them, their ideal outcome is that Susan Lee is given the summer to try and sell net zero, but also to land a strong position, a clear position on immigration and where those migration numbers should be. And for Andrew Hastie, he actually sees immigration as being a much bigger issue out there in the electorate than net zero.
I'm an Australian and I want to channel what a lot of regular Australians are thinking out there, and we're just sick and tired of seeing these ancient hatreds spill out onto our streets. This is Australia. All of us who are citizens have obligations to our country, to our values, and we don't want to see these hatreds imported to our country.
So I think whoever does take the coalition to the next election wants to have these platforms laid down very early so they can go out and sell.
It's an interesting choice for moderates. Of course, you can tell just by listening to Andrew Hastie that he's a highly intelligent, good-looking, respectable war hero. Any party would want him in a senior position. But he does have views that those moderates who are worried about the future of the Liberal Party, thanks to the erosion of votes to the Teal candidates, would not agree with. He's extremely sceptical about high levels of immigration. He's got concerns about abortion. He was an opponent of same-sex marriage. Do you think the moderates who are supporting Hastie accept those views and understand that the party needs to be more centrist? Or what? Is he just the better the devil they know?
So I think there's a lot of games being played, some nefarious plots, and there is a lot of emotion at the moment for the moderates. They've come to the realisation that the leader they elevated has abandoned them, that they don't have the numbers now in the party room. So they have to lick their wounds. I think what we're seeing is a small number of moderates privately briefing out that Hastie would probably be their preferred option. And I think there's two trains of thoughts. One is it's signalling to say they don't want Angus Taylor. The other one is that they're trying to goad Andrew Hastie into trying to spill the leadership and take it on maybe prematurely, and that if things don't go well, then they might have an alternative. My understanding would be that Anthony Albanese and his senior team would look at Angus Taylor and say, we've got his measure. They already know that they have Susan Lee's measure. And then, if Tim Wilson pops up as a potential compromise candidate, I think they believe they'd have his measure. So I think Andrew Hastie sort of looms as this wild card figure, which could go spectacularly wrong. It could go okay, or it could go very right.
The Albanese government's just been re-elected with a huge mandate. It is a difficult road to tread for anyone who is trying to lead an opposition against that government. Is this the right time, do you think, for Andrew Hastie to try and take the leadership if he is someone who does ultimately want to be Prime Minister and win elections?
Look, I don't think that anyone believed it would go this badly for Susan Lee this quickly. When you look at the polling, in Newspoll, the coalition down to a record low of 24% in terms of primary vote. One Nation is surging. So it's sort of probably come on a bit sooner than someone like Andrew Hastie would have wanted it to come on. And then he's got the other issue that him and his supporters would have to resolve, which is to unite the Conservative faction behind him. So there has been talk that could this be a three-leader scenario? Could it be Susan Lee, Angus Taylor, then Andrew Hastie? I think at the end of the day, if the opportunity is there, he will go for it. He certainly doesn't want to do this in some sort of dirty deal with the moderates. He wants his own faction that have the numbers to get in hard behind him.
Coming up, so who is Andrew Hastie? Let's talk about who Andrew Hastie is and what he believes in. He was born in Wangaratta in Victoria. Mum was a teacher, Dad was a pastor, a Presbyterian pastor. He went to Scots College in Sydney, a famous Presbyterian school. And then after starting an arts degree, quickly decided that his future lay in the Defence Force. What motivated that change for him?
At the age of 19, while he was at university, after the September 11 terror attacks in America, that motivated a young Andrew Hastie to commit himself to service with the ADF, and he joined the SAS and then obviously did several tours of duty over in the Middle East. So the Christian upbringing, very, very devout Christian upbringing, tight family unit, and then entering the Defence Force at a young age very much has built the core values for Andrew Hastie. Then he came in at the 2015 Canning by-election as a young family guy, and, he's got a few young kids, and that's a juggle. It's always really hard for a Perth or Western Australian-based parliamentarian to lead a party. So I think that, in a way, has probably potentially held him back, but he's still only 43. It's a really young age, but in politics, ambition is everything, and you've got to think that potentially you don't have all the time in the world here. So I think that's a real motivator for Andrew Hastie.
In talking about his political philosophy, I think maybe you could sum it up as common sense. Andrew Hastie has said that he believes that the Liberals need to stop talking about factions and philosophies and neoliberalism or traditional conservatism and just start offering common sense solutions to Australians who want to raise their families and have sustainable jobs. He's sometimes dismissed, I think, as a populist, but he seems to also take lines on issues that are not necessarily popular. For example, he spoke out about the Ben Roberts-Smith defamation case, another commando who had been accused of committing war crimes and sought defamation action. Andrew Hastie gave evidence essentially against Ben Roberts-Smith and then spoke out after the trial saying that he was in support of the other military officers who had given evidence against Robert Smith. He said that Australia needed a warrior culture, but soldiers also needed to not commit murder.
This is not about left or right. It's not about woke or unwoke. It's not about one media corporation versus another. It's not about toxic masculinity or any other gendered take. In the end, it's a simple question of morality. It's right versus wrong. It's the rule of law versus the rule of the jungle. And to put it very simply, Australian soldiers do not execute non-combatants who have been taken as prisoners.
It would have been a lot easier for him just to stay quiet about that because there are powerful people in WA who supported Ben Roberts-Smith and continue to do so. What do you think is his philosophy, Jeff? What guides him?
I think that his philosophy is still evolving. He takes some interesting positions, and this is why some of the Labor think tanks are interested in him, because he's got a lot of AWU members in his electorate, and he's actually stood up beside them fighting on the same issues that they are fighting for. So that makes him a bit of a wild card in that sense. He's very black and white in some of his views, which is not a bad thing in politics, because the criticism of many recent leaders and politicians is that they flip-flop depending on what the polling says or the focus group says. There's plenty of people that says, well, it's time for generational change. And there's a lot of support for Andrew Hastie and Jacinta Price out there amongst conservatives. And those conservatives are just currently splattered across a bunch of different minor parties or one nation. So could he be, with Jacinta Price and others, the future of a conservative Liberal Party?
Jeff Chambers is The Australian's political editor. You can read all his reporting and analysis, plus all the latest from Canberra right now at theaustralian.com.au.